Welcome to Constitutional Law Series Episode 3. Today, we are dealing with the history of Indian Constitution. Previously on LawMap, we discussed the meaning of the word and the link to the video is available in the description box. The history of Indian Constitution is divided across 2 episodes. Today, we will discuss the timeline between 1857 and 1935, which is part 1 to this discussion. The revolt of 1857, known by different names across history, was hailed as the first ever organized resistance against the British. The East India Company was a joint stock company that had special powers to trade in the Indian Ocean region. The richness of resources and beneficial trade agreements with Indian rulers prolonged their stay. Over time, the company made calculated inroads into the political realm, and it was only a matter of time until they became rulers. In fact, the company was an agent of British imperialism in India. Due to oppressive and divisive nature of their policies, there was an ever-growing resentment against this foreign power. In 1857, one incident was going to be a catalyst that ousted the company out of India. This incident was the execution of Mangal Pandey. Mangal Pandey was an Indian sepoy in the 34th Bengal Native Infantry. In 1857, a new rifle was going to be introduced into the British Army. The cartridge to this rifle, which had to be ripped using mouth, was allegedly made from cow and pig fat. This news angered the Hindus and Muslims in the army since their religion prohibits consumption of these animals. In addition to this, the Indian sepoys were treated with disgrace in the army, which only added as an additional cause for this mutiny. In this rage, a 29-year-old Mangal Pandey opened fire and attempted to kill his commanding officers. This incident ended in the execution of Mangal Pandey. His execution created massive unrest among Indian sepoys in the British Army, and the sentiment spread across the northern part of India, where several reports of uprisings against British were reported. The British Crown quickly involved in this issue and liquidated the company out of India. It was declared that India was going to be governed by the British Crown directly from then on. This change of administration was facilitated through the Government of India Act of 1858. This act transformed the British administration in India. Primarily, the act focused on bringing India under the direct administration of the Crown and to gain the confidence of Indians. The Act introduced several changes that go on to become important events in the constitutional history. Civil service was the bureaucracy of the Crown, empowered to oversee the implementation of government policies in various departments of administration. These officers act as a bridge between the British Crown and the Indian people. In an attempt to gain the trust of Indians, the Crown restored occupied territories to native rulers under a condition of loyalty to the British government. A Secretary of State was the political head assisted by a council. This office had to coordinate with the Indian rulers and civil servants, as well as instruct the Viceroy on matters of governance. These changes mark an important development in the administration sphere. With an attempt to rectify the wrongs done by the company, more reforms were to come in the upcoming years. A council was a miniature cabinet that dealt with different departments of administration by actively advising the Secretary of State and giving orders to the Viceroy. This Act of 1861 made changes to this body. For the first time, 3 Indians got representation in a council: Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinakar Rao. This was a first step in the direction of representative institutions. To ease the administration, portfolio system was introduced. As per this, each council member was put in charge of the departments. During times of emergency, the Viceroy could issue ordinance which would remain for a minimum period of 6 months. The assent of Viceroy was essential to pass bills on matters of royal importance. Councils, which were only established at the imperial level, was now permitted for establishment in the provincial level. The Indian National Congress was formed in 1885 with an aim to secure the unity among Indians and bring favorable changes in political administration. Knowing the importance of councils in governance, they demanded for elections to this body rather than the system of nomination. In pursuance of this, then Viceroy Lord Dufferin agreed to a system of indirect elections to few posts in the council. This Act of 1892 brought further changes to this council: increase in the number of members in a legislative council. The universities, municipal boards, zamindars, and chambers of commerce could recommend members into the council. Non-official members were introduced into central and provincial councils through elections. These changes indicated a positive step towards inclusion of more voices in the governing bodies. This act was the result of discussion between John Morley and Lord Minto. Although known for its divisive plan to establish electorate on the basis of religion, the act majorly dealt with bringing new changes to the council. The membership in the council was increased. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to secure a spot in the Viceroy's Executive Council as a law member. These 3 acts had a humongous impact on the administration of India. They guaranteed structure and uniformity, which ends up becoming integral components of governance in the form of article in the present constitution. This act was based on a recommendation of Edwin Montagu and Lord Chelmsford. The act intends to bring constitutional reforms and provide for representation of Indians in the administration. Central legislature gets exclusive powers to make laws on matters of national importance, as well as on those matters relating to more than one province. The Viceroy's Executive Council has 3 Indians out of the 8. The legislature was divided into 2 houses: Lower House, Central Legislative Assembly, and Upper House, the Council of State. This act introduced major changes to the governing body in India, but it failed to gather Indian support due to its narrow application. The formulation of Simon Commission in 1927 to review the working of the Government of India Act 1919, which had obtained a status of constitution, became an impetus for the Nehru Report. The commission faced vehement opposition due to non-inclusion of Indians. During this time, Lord Birkenhead put an open challenge to the Indians. This caused for an all-parties conference of the Indian National Congress to draft the constitution. The conference established a committee with Motilal Nehru as its chairman, and the result of this was the Nehru Report of 1928. The report recommended several points which is now the part of Indian Constitution, such as fundamental right, disassociation of state from religion, independent judiciary, establishment of Supreme Court, and federal government with centre retaining residuary powers among several others. The document also sought for a dominion status with parliamentary form of government and a bicameral legislature. Although the report ushered progressive ideas, several Indian leaders opposed it since they feared the dominance of Hindus, because the report rejected the idea of separate electorate for Muslims. The British too rejected this report for points on dominion status. M.N. Roy led the communist movement in India and was a supporter of radical democracy. The very first demand for a constituent assembly in the history of India was said to be made by M.N. Roy in 1934. An assembly whose only objective was to frame a constitution. This allowed a segue for the Indian National Congress to place a demand for the same cause at the party session at Lucknow, presided by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. The Indian National Congress placed its formal official demand for a Constituent Assembly in 1935. However, this demand fell on deaf ears. Around the same time, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1935. The objective of this law was to elaborate on the government and its administration in India, as well as edging towards receiving the label of Constitution. Establishment of All India Federation with provinces and princely states as its units. Declaring 3 lists: federal, provincial, and concurrent. Internal autonomy was given to the provinces. Establishment of reserved and transferred subjects. Establishment of Reserve Bank of India. This act was considered a significant law after that of 1919. The highlight of this law was the concept of self-government, for which the Indian leaders were fighting for a pretty long period of time. And now, let's look into a rough analysis of the points discussed in today's video and its counterparts in the present Constitution. This marks the end of today's episode. In the upcoming video, we shall discuss part 2 of this topic.